Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this episode of Fighters, Coaches, and Fathers. Matt Fedler is our guest today. How are you, Matt?
I'm doing great. How are you, Jeff?
Excellent. I'm excited to do this interview. Matt is a MVP over at the U of R wrestling team. He was a commentator for Saturday Night Fights. Probably had as a Saturday Night Fights fighter, had probably one of the best submissions that we saw, as well as a grappler and somebody who I've always admired because of the way that he has led in his community. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But before we get going, Matt, and talk about all the things that are happening for you, talk to me a little bit about your ridiculous family. Because whenever I see a picture of those guys, like growing up in North Battleford and going there, but it was so funny because I've known you for so long, but then you realize, you know, your family, you're just like, get out of here. Talk to me about growing up in North Battleford, and we'll start there.
Yeah, I've got a big, crazy family, as you mentioned. I've got my immediate family, 5 older sisters, no brothers. So I'm the youngest and the only boy. So might have been a little spoiled growing up. And then extended family. Well, my sisters now, we just had the latest addition to the family. Emily is my newest niece. I've got now 6 nieces, 7 nephews, and another niece on the way here in November.
Congratulations.
So ever expanding. Thank you very much. And yeah, my extended family, my parents each have 9 or 10 siblings, endless cousins. It's nice. It's good to have that support system behind you.
It's an army, let's be honest, and it's an army of way more women, I think. And it's just kind of like, yeah, that's a danger. Like that's a formidable foe, I think. But we'll find a picture of it so we can show people, because it's awesome, and I really love that. But talk to me a little bit about growing up in North Battleford and with the family, and your journey into athletics and mixed martial arts.
Well, having the 5 sisters, they all played hockey and baseball, like my parents intended for me to, and I just never developed an interest. My mom was telling me a story, actually, of when I was first born. My dad had 5 daughters, no son, and then the day I was born, my dad kind of played it off like, oh, cool, I would have been happy either way. And then a few hours later, gave her a call and said, you know how expensive hockey equipment is? And then, of course, I think all of my sisters ended up playing hockey, and I never did. So that was interesting. And then my parents were busy working, coaching, and taking my sisters to their various sports. So I got a lot of time to myself. I'm a bit of an introvert. I think that might be a result. But I also had a lot of cousins, like I said, and they kind of filled that gap, the brothers that I never had. And we all loved professional wrestling growing up, the WWE, the fake stuff. So I developed a love of that. And then when I moved to Wilkie when I was about 12 years old, they had a kickboxing program. So my mom suggested that might be something I'm interested in. And that's kind of where it all started.
You started at kickboxing in
Wilkie. Yeah.
Wilkie.
Yeah. Small town. What are the chances? Yeah. North Battleford didn't have a program, but Wilkie did. It's the local RCMP.
I always thought you were born and bred wrestler first. So how long did you do kickboxing in Wilkie for?
So I started when I was 12, and then Chris Kent, originally from Regina. Not sure if you know him. He was a wrestling coach. Yeah, and submission grappling expert. And so he moved to town to teach at the local high school in Wilkie. So he joined up with the kickboxing gym and started teaching the grappling aspect. So that's how I got into mixed martial arts. But I did start as a kickboxer originally.
Wow. Now it makes sense, because I remember watching you train at Complete MMA before the Jesse Bolt fight, and you could kick way over your head. It was just like, what do you can do like this crazy, because it didn't make sense. And We talked about it before that fight. I think you're like, I think I'm going to try to kick this guy in the head because he was 6'10" or something. Like, just he
Yeah.
seemed so huge in that fight. That's awesome. So you started in Wilkie, you started kickboxing, and then you start hanging out with Chris Kent, who's a great guy.
Yeah.
Love that guy, and he's just so good in the community wherever he is. And then you start moving forward from working with him to doing what?
So I spent a few years living in Wilkie, and that's when I was training. I actually had my first amateur MMA fight when I was 14 years old in Prince Albert. And then
What, on the street?
no, it was
What commission allowed that?
I don't know if they had a commission at the time, but it was me and another 14-year-old, Eric Andre. I'm not sure if you've heard of him, but he's doing really well for himself in jiu-jitsu. He's out of Saskatchewan. So yeah, had my first amateur MMA fight before I had my first amateur wrestling match, actually. And then when I was about 15, we moved back to North Battleford, and North Battleford had the wrestling program in the high school, whereas Wilkie didn't at the time. Chris Kent, through his great work in Wilkie, has brought that about. But at the time, there wasn't a wrestling program. So moved back to North Battleford and started focusing on amateur wrestling because, so many successful UFC fighters, have that amateur wrestling background.
That's interesting. So you get into the amateur wrestling. How do you meet AJ, or how do you transition from wrestling and your success in wrestling, bronze medalist at the Cougar Camp, MVP in 2014? How do you transition to AJ Scales and complete MMA and training there?
Well, wrestling was kind of always a means to an end. So I started training wrestling in order to complement my mixed martial arts goals. So I focused on wrestling because, it came with the scholarships and, it got you the accolades in school and whatnot. But MMA was always my goal. As it relates to AJ, so Chris Kent also knew AJ growing up. So at one point when I was 12 or 13, I think we made a road trip up to Regina. And that was when AJ was still, I think, in the basement of the YMCA. Not quite the snazzy digs he's got these days.
Yeah.
But we went up and trained there. And I just remember being that young, thinking it was so cool that AJ would go to Brazil and train with, Talis Leites and Shaolin Ribeiro and Wagnney Fabiano, all these famous fighters from Nova União. So I thought that was really cool. And then I just became a diehard Nova União fan. And that kind of factored into my decision to accept the wrestling scholarship here to the U of R, was to be closer to AJ for when I decided to get back into MMA.
That's awesome. And I didn't know that story. I didn't realize, well, what are you now, 16? Like, I didn't realize all that stuff happens when you were so young. So that's awesome. So you get the scholarship. MMA is always a passion of yours. You get the scholarship through U of R, and you're working there to get that stuff done. And then you get, how many amateur fights did you have?
Just the one, actually.
The
Just
one that you had
14.
when you were 12.
Yeah, 14.
So, yeah. Okay. Or 14. Yeah. And then, and you're coming now at a time in MMA where a lot of the guys, who started, like, we'll talk about, there wasn't anybody to fight back in the day. So you just fight anybody. And if you're decent, you could do really, really well. But you're now coming into your dream of MMA in a place where everyone is starting to train MMA and everyone's getting really, really good. And you take a fight with a really talented guy named Jesse Bolt at Saturday Night Fights. Talk to me about the training coming up to that, your attitude, the mental training, and then getting into that fight.
So at that point, I had my first amateur fight when I was 14. Like I said, I had a few amateur kickboxing bouts before that as well. And then all the experience with amateur wrestling and in jiu-jitsu tournaments. So even though my amateur record was 0-1, I still felt like my skills were at the point where I could make the transition to professional fighting, as well as Saskatchewan's strange in that it used to only have amateur fights and now it only has professional fights, and there's no opportunities for amateurs here. So that needs to change, obviously. But all that kind of factored into the decision to just go pro. I felt like my skills were where they needed to be to make the transition. Jesse was, I think, 2-1 professional going into that fight, and I didn't realize how tall he was until I got to the weigh-ins. I didn't know anything about him, so that was a surprise. But like I said, I just took that as a challenge, and I wanted to see if I could reach his head with my foot. Wasn't able to, but got the submission.
I remember commentating that fight, and we were sitting there, and I'm like, I was saying, I think what Matt said that he's going to do, he's just going to try to high kick, and I've seen him kick lights out other places, and actually you were surprisingly close to nailing that kick, but then you could just see that look on Jesse's face, like, are you kidding me? And then sort of goes for that takedown, and then of course the inevitable result, which that crowd started screaming. He had a lot of friends there and a lot of supporters, and that moment was great because you got yourself into some trouble, man, and then you ended up pulling off a fantastic victory, and that was exciting. So
it was really cool too because having that opportunity to train with AJ, I started to idolize all these Nova União fighters, and maybe my favorite fighter was Wagnney Fabiano, who to most fans is kind of an obscure name because he was big in the IFL back in the day, so he wasn't as well known. He never actually made it to the UFC because that was before the time of the lower weight classes there. But he was one of the best in the world. My money, the best in the world at featherweight at one point. So I idolized that guy. And then when AJ wasn't allowed to corner us because he was the promoter for that event, he flew in Wagnney to corner all of us. So I got one of my idols to be in my corner. And after the win, he ran into the ring and lifted me above his head. It was a really cool moment.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I love Wagnney. I think he's great. But how's your Portuguese?
Non-existent.
So yeah, but then again, you know when he's in your corner and you're looking at his eyes, if he's telling you something, it doesn't matter what language he's speaking, you know what he's saying, right?
Yeah, and he didn't restrict himself, I don't think, to the corner. He was all over the place, yelling and screaming. So
yeah, that's amazing. So, in this is a tough sort of conversation because I know we had this, and after that win and stars aligning where it is, we were sitting there and you made a decision to, I'm not sure if it's still valid, but you made a decision to stop fighting professionally after that incredible win. And I was like, Matt, let's talk about this because you're on the way up, right? And it was a very mature decision. But tell me about when that decision happened and how it happened.
So this was about the time when all the information about CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, the condition caused by repeated head trauma, was coming out. You had the movie Concussion with Will Smith. So I'm not sure if there was an exact eureka moment, but at some point I realized that this maybe getting hit in the head for a living wasn't the best career plan, and I might want to transition somewhere else. So actually, before that fight, I think I had decided that this probably wasn't going to be a career for me, but I wanted to do it because I've been training for so long. So it was a bucket list item for me, definitely. And I did want to see how the training camp would go and how the fight would go, and if that might influence my decision to maybe stick to the path. But at the end of the day, it was a really great experience. I'm glad I did it, but I'm okay to be putting the cage fighting days behind me.
Yeah, and what I love so much about you is when someone makes that decision, a lot of times fighters will make a decision to retire, or they can't seem to make that decision, like Tito and Chuck. There's money and there's all the other stuff, and I'm glad it's those two guys only fighting. But like you did this really cool transformation where you took the things that you were interested in and started developing or deciding to be a leader in those. You ran for the New Democratic Party. You ran for the University of Regina student union presidency, and you continued to do things that are very difficult, but are very much putting you in a leadership light. Is there any and is there any sort of, how does that transition happen?
In terms of
the fight,
leadership,
yeah, the competitiveness and moving forward, or is there similarities to doing that?
There are definitely some transferable skills and qualities, I'm sure. Stubbornness, combativeness. I mean, I like to say that cage fighting wasn't brutal enough for me, so I decided to get into politics. So there's definitely some transferable skills. In terms of leadership, I think I always just had a real passion for martial arts and almost a tunnel vision at one point. That was all I wanted to do. And you saw it in the gym and during practices. It was kind of, I was always kind of introverted. So I wasn't the type to get up and tell people what to do, this and that, but I did lead by example. And I think coaches tend to pick up on that and put me into these leadership positions where I then had to develop those more verbal skills, I suppose. But by and large, I prefer to lead by example. In terms of the transition into politics, my family was never overtly political. Wasn't something we talked about. But my dad did always have the news on. He was always watching, staying informed, being a responsible citizen. And so I picked up on that. That's just what adults do. That's what the responsible thing to do, is to keep an ear to the ground and an eye on what's happening around you in the world. And so I always had an interest in it. I ran, actually. I think I was class president in elementary school. I was class president in high school as well. So I was always kind of inclined in that way. I got away from it to focus on mixed martial arts. And then when I decided to finally hang the gloves up, a fellow by the name of Bernie Sanders kind of caught my eye. He was the one of the Democratic candidates running for the nomination there in the States in 2016. Everyone else was kind of focused on the orange one, he who shall not be named. But Bernie Sanders caught my eye, and just the integrity and the persistence that he had in fighting for what he believed in, and not, falling into the trap that so many people think is inevitable of becoming the standard politician that does what donors want instead of what he believes in. So he was a real inspiration to me to get involved at a local level, and here I am. I decided to jump right in and run for a federal seat.
Yeah, amazing. And we watch that in every single action that you take. It's almost like training, right? It's like you're going to lose a whole bunch before you start to win. But when you start to win and get your time in there, things just sort of happen like they always should have. But nothing comes easy. But I love the quote, cage fighting wasn't brutal enough for me, so I had to go into politics. I'll never forget that. Can we get shirts made of that? I don't know.
I'll talk to the campaign manager next time.
There we go.
Yeah, they feel about it.
I got to ask this question because I was thinking about asking when you're talking about your sisters. So go off a little bit chronologically here. All your sisters played hockey, and you went into kickboxing. That to me seems like maybe your sisters were tough on you as a kid, or maybe they were too soft on you. Like what? How do you make that decision? I don't want to be like my sisters. Like what how does that happen?
I don't know. I think you'd probably have to talk to a therapist or something to really get a sense of what inspired me to go the way I did. But no, my sisters were, we had the squabbles as siblings do. But by and large, I think I tended to stay out of the thick of it and just play with my WWE action figures in my room while they fought amongst themselves. I got into it a little bit here and there, but nothing too bad. No, I didn't get beat up or anything like that.
That's awesome.
I think it was my cousins more than anything. We're just big WWE fans, and so we got into that, and the natural transition. That was just around the time of the first season of The Ultimate Fighter when the UFC really started to blow up. So I think that might have been it. I think at one point The Ultimate Fighter was slated to come on directly after Monday Night Raw on television. So I think that probably didn't hurt either.
Nice. That's awesome. So are you still competing in wrestling or grappling?
No. while I was planning to be wrestling in the fall, I'm back in school now for political science, and I was hoping to be on the U of R Cougars team. I got my gear on, but unfortunately, it's not an option any longer.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the U of R wrestling team, because it is a stellar program. It is 5-star across the board. McGee, guys that were there, and Rich, Chi, like, when you think about that program created world-class athletes. But not only that, outside of world-class athletes, he created a structure and a just a great quality of person. And something happened to that program this year. What sort of happened?
Yeah, so they called it a budget decision. They ended up cutting the men's and women's wrestling teams and the men's volleyball team as well a few months back. And I think it was an unfortunate, short-sighted decision. Like you said, the structure, the community that came out of that program. First of all, the history of the program. It's the most successful program in the history of the U of R athletics. And the community that comes out of that. So the U of R wrestlers make up the vast majority of the referees at the kids tournaments and the high school tournaments. And then when they graduate, a lot of them stay here in the city, and they tend to go on and coach high school kids. So I think it's a really short-sighted decision that was made, and didn't really fully take into account the repercussions, the potential repercussions for the city of Regina as a whole.
Right. Now, you did run for student union president. If an opportunity presents itself to run again or something else, would you have more influence to maybe help get that back on, or even now in the community as a leader?
Potentially. I was really proud of the young kids. I'm a few years removed. I was planning on returning this coming fall, so I'm a few years removed, but I still keep in touch with the program, see the young kids coming up, and I was really proud of Jordan and Amber, the two coaches, or the two captains of the team, and the push that they did, and the media tour. Essentially, I went to the legislative building because I've got some connections there with my work with the NDP, so I went there in solidarity with them, and they were lobbying to the Minister of Advanced Education and the official opposition critic, Trent Weatherspoon. And so I was really proud of the push that they did. Unfortunately, the school wasn't budging. If there's anything I can do, I'm still not giving up the fight. I think if there's any possible way that we can get the program back, I think it's inevitable. It's just a matter of how soon it happens.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it is so. And when they talk about budget shortfall, and I remember reading some on that story, and it's no small number. I think I read, and I might be wrong, but it sounded like about $500,000 that needed to be raised in order to maintain that without extra support from the university or government funding. I'm not sure where that comes from, but yeah, man, the people that come out of that program, it's not just wrestling and coaches and referees, as much as that's awesome to build great things, but kids today, I think, have so many different influences on them, and a lot of those influences aren't great for health or athletics. And I mean, you take a look at the amount of wrestlers that go into corrections or policing or things like that, and you realize that it's a program that creates really disciplined, structured, great people that understand the value of good habits and understand the value of and are doing the transition to do the transition to do some other really, really big things and lead in the community. Would you agree?
Yeah, of course. And the more opportunities for kids to be getting active is the better, and getting put into these social situations, of course, is helpful, and being thrust into these roles of leadership, like I had been, are all great for the development of the next generation, for sure. And you look at like a program like in Wilkie with Chris Kent, the amazing things he's doing there. There's not a lot of options. It's kind of a hockey town, hockey and baseball. And if you don't fit into that mold, which I, of course, didn't, your options are limited, and then that's when kids maybe have too much time on their hands and they start getting into some trouble on the streets. And so to keep kids occupied and give them more options to fill their time with productive physical activity, I think is a positive thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I 100% agree. Hey, listen, Matt, I really appreciate you taking the time to do the interview today, and I'm excited to hopefully I'll see you in October for MFC 2. You're one of the legends or Saturday Night Fights and guest commentator for MFC. If we ever get you down there, I'll have you back at the commentary level.
Yeah, it was a great opportunity. Thanks again for helping make that happen. That's something I'd love to look into doing more of.
Well,
Staying in touch with the sport.
Yeah, I think you're a natural at it. Let me ask this question though. The question that I ask everybody is, as we find out that the type of person you often become are due to pivotal moments or conversations or things around your family, what's one of the greatest lessons maybe you've learned from your family?
I have a pretty big family, and there's a lot of love that goes around with that, and there's a lot of chaos, obviously, but more than anything, there's a lot of love. And my parents are two of the kindest people you'll ever meet. My mom works as an educational assistant and LPN, a nurse. Three of my sisters are nurses. Another of my sisters is a high school principal, or elementary school principal. They're all mothers, of course, at this point. So there's a lot of love and kindness, and I think that's more than anything. I took that away. And when you grow up with such a big family, especially with the extended family, all of the cousins, you start to kind of lose track of who is or isn't a family. You have these people coming in, and you kind of call them uncle, but you're not 100% sure if there's any relation. But at the end of the day, they're family. You kind of gain this perspective that you should treat everyone as though they are your family, because they might be, in my case. But
Interesting.
Yeah, we're all in this together, and we can do better together.
Well, listen, I want to ask one more question because you did the cross-country Canada tour on the train. You stopped off in Vancouver. We went for dinner at Banana Leaf, and you and I both just about fell asleep into a coma after that dinner. It was so awesome. Yeah. But your love for Canada and doing that trip must have had its trials and tribulations, but I envy the fact that you did that. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was a really great experience last summer. So Via Rail had that promotion, the Canada 150 for the 150th anniversary. And so it was $150, the promotion for 30 days of unlimited travel. And obviously that's a great deal. So I tried to hop on that. I think that sold out in like a minute or two upon release. So I wasn't able to get that. But I think their regular deal was a little over $700 for 60 days. So I decided that was good enough anyway. So I'd gotten the idea in my head of doing a cross-country train trip. So I decided to buck up the extra cash and go for it. And yeah, it was great. Growing up in Saskatchewan, the land of the living skies, lots of, it's very flat. I'm not sure if you've heard.
Oh yeah, no, you can watch your dog run away for days.
Yeah, and a cool thing about this opportunity I've had working with the NDP and stuff, you make your way around the province, and so there's actually a lot of hidden gems and a lot of beautiful areas if you know where to find them. It's not all just flat wheat fields, but there is quite a bit of that. So getting the opportunity to go coast to coast, seeing everywhere from the mountains in BC and Alberta to, all the way to Prince Edward Island and everything in between. It was just a really great experience. And of course, I think Canadians have a reputation for their good manners and good spirit and kindness. And I can now confirm that is the case. It was a great experience. Meeting people on the train and in every city we stopped in. You get a real for how we happen to grow up in this country and have the privileges that come with it.
Yeah, man. I like I said, I was envious of it, and when you did it, it's worth far more than $700 that you spent. And I know that there was probably a couple meetings on that train that will change or have altered your life and will in the future, from then on in. And that's why I was just like, oh man, I can't believe it. And as soon as you say, hey, I'm going to be in Vancouver on the train, you did the train ride. We got to go for dinner. Anyway, man, thank you
really
so
cool.
much.
You know, I've got, you're in Vancouver. I've got some cousins, and I had some school, some friends from school that were out there. I've got friends in Toronto. I had a friend in Prince Edward Island, family in Montreal. So I got to make those connections, visit some people that you don't get to see as often as you'd like, including yourself. So it was a great trip.
Yeah, it was awesome, Matt. Thanks for taking the time today. It was great talking to you. I hope to see you in October when I'm back. And I want to thank you so much again.
Thank you. Always great to talk to you, Jeff. Hopefully see you in October.
Perfect. Thanks, Matt.